Welcome to the first night of Chanukah. It's my pleasure to kick off this series of stories by lighting the candles and telling a story. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu להדליק ner shel Chanukah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asa nisim la'avoteinu bayamim hahem b'hazman hazeh. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה. הנרות הללו אנחנו מדליקים על הניסים ועל התשועות ועל הנפלאות שעשית לאבותינו על ידי כהניך הקדושים בראש שמונת ימי חנוכה. הנרות הללו קודש הם ואין לנו רשות להשתמש בהם אלא לראותם בלבד, כדי להודות לשמך הגדול על ניסיך ועל ישועתך ועל נפלאותיך. מעוז צור ישועתי לך נאה לשבח, תיכון בית תפילתי ושם תודה נזבח, לתכין מטבח מצרם נבח. אז אגמור בשיר מזמור חנוכת המזבח, אז אגמור בשיר מזמור חנוכת המזבח. Happy Hanukkah. The room was dark and silent. I waited. I felt my heart beating. Then there was the scratch of a match and a flash of light. I could see my grandmother, my Bubba, as she held the match before her face. She lit the shamash candle and used it to kindle the one lonely candle that stood all alone in the menorah on this first night of Hanukkah. Bubba whispered, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Chanukah. She stood before the menorah and stared at the flame of the first candle. Her eyes began to fill with tears, but she did not blink. She looked so sad, so very far away in thought. My grandfather, my Zayda, came up behind her and hugged her close to him. He quietly finished the remaining 2 blessings recited on the first night of Hanukkah. Bubba clutched the 2 hands that hugged her. Mother turned on the kitchen light. The shadows disappeared from the wall. Bubba turned her face to Zayda and they hugged. Don't worry about your Bubba's tears, said Zayda as he noticed me standing beside them. Each year on the first night of Chanukah, your Bubba looks into the flame of that first candle and sees it filled with a very special memory. I hurried back to the kitchen table, climbed onto a chair and raised myself up on both knees so I would be as tall as that first candle. I wanted to know what Bubba saw. What do you think, Sarah? Zayda asked Bubba. It's time to tell him. Come here, Bubbale, invited Bubba. She picked me up and carried me into the living room and placed me on her knees as she sat down. Look outside, Bubba began, as she pointed to the window. It was a night just like tonight, many, many years ago. We lived in a small village called a shtetl. Our home was small too, it had only 2 rooms. One was a bedroom for my mama and papa, the other was a kitchen and living room all in one. My brother Chaim, my sister Esther and I slept on straw mattresses. We would huddle together in front of the big stove in the kitchen. It was the first night of Chanukah, and we were busy getting ready. We had to wash the walls and sweep the floor and cover it with a new layer of straw. Chaim had to bring in the wood from outside to keep the fire burning in the stove. Mama was cooking. She cooked all day. Most of the time we ate only bread, onions, some milk and a few vegetables. But as if by magic, Mama always had some treats for the holidays. For Chanukah she made little cakes and wonderful latkes. All day long the whole house smelled of potatoes and onions frying. It was very cold. The wind howled and crept into the door through cracks in the walls and from under the door. If you stepped too far away from the stove, you felt a chill that made you shiver. We were dressed in our holiday clothes waiting for Papa to come home. He was a woodcutter and had taken a cartload of wood to the home of a customer. We knew that he should have been home by now. He was always home in time to begin the holidays. Mama said nothing. She scurried back and forth between the kitchen stove and the kitchen table. Finally, she sat down in her wooden chair and picked up her sewing. I loved to watch her as she slipped the needle in and out of the material, pausing every now and then to moisten the tip of a new thread in her mouth and pass it through the eye of the needle. When the wind rattled the front door, we would look up anxiously, hoping that it was Papa, but it was only the wind. Papa was still out there in the snow somewhere, trying to get home to us. Eventually, the time came to light the menorah, but none of us said a word to Mama. We would light it when Papa came home. Outside, we heard the voices of some of the men singing on their way home from the shtibel after evening prayers. Even though the wind howled, the nigunim of the men could be heard clearly. If only your Papa could hear the nigunim, Mama whispered like a prayer. Suddenly, Mama grabbed her shawl, draped it over her head and around her shoulders. She ran outside. What was she doing? Why did she run outside into the bitter, cold, snowy night? We waited. The front door crashed open and a gust of wind rushed inside. It rattled the rickety wooden table and pushed the old rocking chair back and forth. Mama told us to get our coats and follow her. Quickly, we left the house and immediately our eyes began to water from the cold. Our faces grew red and we pulled up our scarves to cover our mouths and noses. We scurried behind Mama as she led us through the shtetl, past the butcher shop and the marketplace. The snow was up to our knees and we had to lift our legs high in the air as we trudged along. Finally, we reached the shtibel. As we opened the door to enter, snow blew in and made the faded floorboards wet. The shtibel had only one room, like most of the houses. In the middle was a raised platform surrounded by wooden railings. To the left were bookshelves filled with old books. Straight ahead, mounted like a cabinet onto the eastern wall, was the ark. It had a scarlet velvet curtain across its front, and inside, hidden by the curtain, was the sacred Torah. Low wooden benches were scattered throughout the room. More people came in after us, and soon the little room was filled. The whole town was there. Reb Avramel the tailor, Reb Moshe the baker, Reb Shlomo the shochet, everyone was there. In the midst of this throng was our Rebbe. He wore his long black coat and sat behind one of the long narrow tables in the centre of the room. He lifted his head and looked out at all of us through eyes as black as coal. He did not blink. His beard was white and reached all the way to his chest. I was worried. Why were we here? And what was our Rebbe about to do? Then in a haunting, trembling voice, the Rebbe began that mysterious sing-song chant called the Nigun. Ya Baba, Ya Baba, Ya Baba, Baba, Baba. And almost without realizing it, we began to sing with the Rebbe. Our bodies swayed back and forth to the beat of the mysterious melody. The shtibel shook and vibrations ran along the floorboards. Ya Baba, Ya Baba. We held on to each other and sang louder and louder. Ya Baba, Ya Baba. My eyes glimpsed the menorah in the centre of the room. The vibrations in the room made the flame dance on the surface of the oil. Then the The singing stopped. All of a sudden there was silence. The Rebbe had stopped, and as one voice we stopped too. No one said a word. The Rebbe opened his eyes and looked beyond us to the door. As his glance reached the door, it burst open. "David!" cried Mama. "Papa!" we cried, and ran with Mama to hug him. He shivered as we held on to him. His dark beard was hidden by frost and ice. We held on to him and hugged. "David," said Bubba as she turned from the window and looked at me, "you were named for my father." "Bubba," I asked, "what happened?" "It was a miracle. My father had been travelling home in that storm all day. It was snowing so hard he could not see even 2 feet in front of him. When it grew dark, he almost gave up all hope of ever finding his way home. And then he heard music. He heard singing. Just like Mama thought, the sound of our voices singing in the shtibel reached him and guided him home. So you see, David, Chanukah was a time of miracles for the Maccabees, and it was a time of miracles for your Bubba too. Whenever I light that first candle in the menorah, I see a picture of my Papa in the flame. Maybe someday, when you grow older, you'll look into that first flame and you'll see a picture of your Bubba. The flames hold memories. I jumped down from Bubba's lap and ran to the kitchen table. For a long time, I stared into the flame of that first candle. Would I see a picture someday too? Happy Chanukah! Hope you enjoy this first night and all the nights to come.